everyone, Foxes here, and I'm bringing you my weekly wrap-up. This is going to be a wrap-up for the week, or rather a week and a half, between August 29th and September the 7th. I honestly was trying my best to read as many library books as I possibly could before my vacation. However, I didn't manage to read them all. There were a couple just that I had to return because I knew I would not be able to read them before I leave. And I also have a couple left that I will read once I return, but nevertheless, I did make a very good dent in my library TBR. So just let's get started and see what I've read. So during that week, or rather week and a half, I read 7 graphic novels and 1 novel. So let's just get started with graphic novels first. First graphic novel that I read was another installment in Mouse Guard series by David Peterson, and this one was actually volume number 3 of the side story series called The Legends of the Guard. And I did enjoy this volume. I was a bit disappointed that Hoopla had only volume number 3 available, and I couldn't read volume number 1 or 2 neither on Hoopla or on Overdrive, which made me really sad. However, all of those volumes can be read as standalones. This volume is actually a compilation of stories which are written and drawn not only by David Peterson but a whole bunch of different artists, and the story is set in a tavern in which the owner of the tavern brings all of the lodgers together and tells them to tell her story, and the one whose story is the best, she's going to forgive all the debts. So they set out to tell different stories. Some tell stories and from their experiences, and others tell legends. Since this is essentially a compilation of different stories, the art is very diverse. There are different illustrations, but it's all put together by David Peterson, so his main story is the one which kind of brings all stories together. It is very diverse in terms of the art. The artwork is beautiful. I loved all of the stories, and I was just a bit disappointed by the fact that most of them had pretty much the same theme in terms of, overcoming difficulties or fighting for, fighting for something. So it was kind of, I had a feeling as if the plots were a bit repetitive in all of those stories. However, the setting itself is wonderful. I just love Mouse Guard series, and those little mice who, we're close and talk about legends, and the language is beautiful. I don't know, I just loved it. I gave this volume 4 stars only because I had a feeling as if it's slightly repetitive in plot, but the artwork and the variety of artwork was amazing, and I highly recommend if you want to check it out. It's not connected to any other of the volumes in plot, so it can be read as a standalone, and I wish I could get my hands on volumes number 1 and 2 in this separate series because I did enjoy it. And I read issue number 2 of The Spire by Simon Spurrier, and this issue was even more confusing than issue number 1. I was a bit confused about everything that was happening there. However, the artwork is so wonderful, and I like the main plot idea about how there are aliens and there is different species and there are different creatures and there is also magic and there is a bit of a twist and there is humor. I don't know, I don't even know how to explain the plot here, but I enjoyed this volume. I enjoyed this issue slightly less, that's why I gave it 3 stars, 3.5 stars. Next, I read Super Mutant Magic Academy by Gillian Tamaki, and this graphic novel was a huge disappointment. So essentially, it is set in a magic academy, basically in a school where we have a whole bunch of high school students who are different species, have different magic powers. They have the same problems as pretty much any other teenager. They fall in love, they make out, they lose friends, they make friends, and some other weird stuff happens. However, what I did not like about it, the art is kind of okay. I wasn't a fan of the art, but it just felt as if this was not a one book, but rather a collection of short stories. What I mean by that is that pretty much every single page, not just like a spread, but just one page is one standalone story. So it does spread out through a school year, and you do see all the same characters over and over again, and they, interact with each other. But at the same time, some of these were just like, look at this. This one, for example, doesn't have any text on it whatsoever. And I mean, it is supposed to be witty and it's supposed to be funny because there is some tropes in there which are the author plays around with, and there is some other things that are made fun of, and for example, like expression, and how teenagers are sometimes, over the board with expressing themselves. They tend to exaggerate everything, and there were some cute things like this one's, in space, and I don't know, like some of them were okay, but on the whole scale, if I have to judge the book as a book, it's not a book. And that was my biggest pet peeve with this graphic novel, is because it doesn't read as a graphic novel, and even though it does have the same characters, it does not come well together. And basically when you get to the very ending, and there is that little thing that, like, like epilogue, where you can read what happened to the main characters and who they turned out to be, which I had a very similar feeling to, like, 19 years later, Harry Potter, the epilogue in the last book in the series. And I had this feeling because honestly, I don't want to know what happened to the characters later on. It just, the book kind of finishes with them graduating from high school, and that's it. So it's graduation from high school and the prom, and there is really not much to it. It's just, I think that if this, I'm not sure if it was originally a web comic or something serialized, but it just makes more sense for it to be a series of web comics rather than a one graphic novel put together. Maybe it was. I don't know, but this does not really read like a solid graphic novel. That's why I was disappointed. At the same time, it was a very easy read just because you could pick up, read a page, and get like a short story, most of which did not really make much sense to me. I had a lot of problems with this one. I didn't find a lot of jokes funny, and I didn't find a lot of tropes funny either, so the only thing that saved this book was the magic, setting, and the fact that we had different species, and there was a girl who could turn into a fox, which was pretty cute. And as you know, I love foxes, so that was a good thing. But at the same time, the book on its own was a huge disappointment, so I gave it only 2 stars. Next, I finished Sailor Moon series. I read volumes number 10, 11, and 12, and this was the volume in which the Dark Moon Circus arc finished, and I wasn't a huge fan of that arc. I find this volume a bit more boring. There was just a lot of battle scenes that were going, you know how it goes in Sailor Moon. Oh my god, everyone dies, but then suddenly Sailor Moon discovers a new power in herself and she brings everyone back to life. That's pretty much what happens in every single arc of Sailor Moon. I enjoyed this volume, but not as much as the rest of them, so I gave this one 3.5 stars. And I gave volumes 11 and 12 4 stars each. These 2 volumes are about Star's arc, and this is the final installment in the Sailor Moon series. I did enjoy it. I think I'm the least familiar with this arc because it was the last season of Sailor Moon, and even though I did watch it, I don't really remember it that well. So reading those 2 volumes was quite exciting. I'm sorry, I don't know if you can see the cover is just the white, upsets my white balance on the camera. So I did enjoy them. I gave each 4 stars, like I said, and the only thing that, as always, I get annoyed by is Chibiusa and Chibi. I just don't like those characters. Seriously, I don't. But I did enjoy everything else. So hooray for that. Finally finished the series. I'm so proud of myself. Next, I read volume number 1 of Requiem of the Rose King by Aya Kano. I have never heard about this manga artist before. And I just picked this volume on a whim because I liked the cover. And you know what? The story really pleasantly surprised me. I really enjoyed it. It is an interesting blend of Henry VI and Richard III by Shakespeare, plus the author added some fictional elements to it, a bit of magical realism or fantasy if you want, and it just turned out to be quite enjoyable. And you know what? The art is absolutely superb. It reminds me a lot of art by Clamp, which is my favorite manga group ever, and the art is very good, and I think the story is pretty well developed for a manga as well. This is volume number 1, and I give it about 4.5, almost 5 stars, which is a very high rating for me for manga. I can actually see myself reading it over and over again. This is the copy that I got from the library, and I think they only have volume number 2 on hand, even though I think there are 4 or 5 volumes released to date. Unfortunately, there is nothing available on Overdrive, and there is nothing available on Hoopla, which makes me super sad. There is nothing on Kindle as well. I don't know. I probably will have to buy paperbacks if I want to continue with the series. Yeah, but I did enjoy it, and if you are into fantasy plus historical retellings done in manga format, you might enjoy this one. And the last but definitely not least is Wink Poppy Midnight by April Genevieve Tucholkie, and this is a YA fantasy slash magical realism slash thriller slash contemporary novel. This is a standalone novel, which is a very pleasant change from all those trilogies and series. And to be honest, I get tired of picking books and then finding out that they're not standalones, but actually series or books number 1 in trilogies. So yeah, this book, I think a lot of people read this book, and I saw people discuss it online. And surprisingly enough, this book doesn't have a very high rating, at least for me. On Goodreads, it's about 3.3 or 3.4, and this is usually not the rating that I go for when I choose a book. However, this book really intrigued me because this catchphrase that they have here, a hero, a villain, a liar, who is who, was really interesting, and I was almost on the verge of buying this book, but I did not, so I picked it up from the library. But I was a bit apprehensive because one of the booktubers that I watch actually said that she did not like it. I think she gave it 2 stars, and she said that there are a lot of problems with this book, and there is a lot of sensitive topics in this book, like bullying and abuse, and it's not healthy, the relationship which is described in this book. But you know what, I picked it up feeling a bit apprehensive, and I had very low expectations, but pretty much almost from the very beginning, I fell in love with this book. It doesn't usually happen with me. I usually, whenever I look at the ratings on Goodreads, I have a pretty good understanding of where I'm going to fall between love and hate. And this book really took me by surprise. First of all, it's told in present tense from the first point of view, from the perspective of 3 characters, Wink, Poppy, and Midnight. And pretty much till the very end of the book, you don't know who is lying, who is a villain, who is a hero, and why. I think that the main misconception about this book is that people tend to view it as a contemporary, but it has a very strong magical realism theme to it. It's very saturated with dreams and magic abilities and predicting future and legends and stories, and in many ways it is basically like a fairy tale but set in the modern times. I enjoyed, and it really, I did not expect this book to be really this much of a magical realism book, and this what attracted me to this book in the first place. I was so surprised that actually all those 3 voices in the book were very distinct and very well put together, and even though some of those views that are told from the 3 perspectives overlap a bit, they're still very distinct and very different, and they create a very rich and vivid world. I never had any problems envisioning any of the characters or whatever was happening in the book, and even though I do, if I stand back and look at it objectively as an adult, I can tell that all the relationships that were described in this book between Midnight and his father and his elder brother and his mother, and Poppy with her relationship with her friends and her like relationship between Poppy and her parents, and Poppy and Midnight, and also Wink thrown into the mix. It's problematic on all levels. There is a lot of bullying. There are mentions of certain abuse, and it's really weird on many levels. So when you look at it, you go like, what the hell is going on? Where is the adult in the story? Because all the parents are sort of out of picture, even though when they're present in the story, they're not really reinforces of any rules or anything that they should be reinforcing, like safety, and basically it just feels as if in a way it is Neverland with Peter Pan, where all of those children just roam around and do what the hell they want. And there are a lot of bullying, like I said, and I mentioned it several times, but there is a lot of bullying in this book. So when you look at it objectively, I can see how this book seems to be glorifying an unhealthy relationship, which is definitely a bad thing, and I'm not an advocate for that in any way. However, it is magical realism, and magical realism is the sort of a genre that blends fantasy and reality, and because of that, you cannot really take this book as a contemporary or as something that is set in the real world. You cannot take it as basically as a truth or reality. That's why I am sort of lenient to give this book, kind of, I'm really lenient to forgive this book pretty much any trespassing in terms of bullying and in terms of relationships, just because I don't know, I enjoyed this book on so many levels. I enjoyed all the individual voices of the characters. I enjoyed the craziness that was happening there. I enjoyed the ghosts and haunted houses and forests and all those side stories. And to be completely honest, and by the middle of the book, I kind of thought that I knew who was a villain, who was a hero, and who was a liar. But then at the end, there were some certain revelations that kind of surprised me. And just because I was surprised, and I was like, well, okay, kind of like by the middle of the book, it felt as if everything was quite obvious and you could tell who was playing which part. But by the end of the book, that small revelation actually changed some things and put some other things into perspective. And even though I do not fully agree with what happened in this book and how characters behaved, and in some ways how it finished, but I still enjoyed it so much. I honestly enjoyed it to the point that I went to Book Outlet and purchased another book by the same author, just because I want to see if she has the same writing style in her other novels. And I enjoyed it. It is a very short book. It is it's 250 pages. I'm a bit embarrassed that it took me so long to read it. I read pretty much one half of it in almost one sitting, and then I just didn't have time to finish it. So I finished it last night really quickly. It's a very easy read when you switch off your brain and stop thinking about how unhealthy some things are. It is very dark in some ways, so if you don't like dark themes, you should not really be probably reading this book. But I enjoyed it. I love the cover. I love the typography of the title. I love the idea of 3 characters and 3 voices. I just liked everything about this book. My only concern here is that I kind of expected a slightly different ending. I wanted something that, because the everything was building up to a climax. And the climax did happen, but it was kind of muted for me. I expected something big. I mean, probably if it weren't a YA story, it would probably end with something big and disastrous happening. And since it's a YA, probably there are some limitations to it. I don't even know, but I expected the climax to be even more epic, and it wasn't, even though there were certain revelations, like I said, that made a huge impact on the storyline and made me really excited about how the things turned out to be. I did enjoy this book. I enjoyed it to the point that I would definitely try and get myself my own copy of this book. However, I will try and get it from a secondhand bookstore because it's super expensive for such a thin book. And I'm also looking forward to reading another book by this author. I hope that she also wrote those books in a magical realism style. I'm a huge fan of fantasy and I'm a huge fan of magical realism, and I think magical realism is the only thing that can make a YA contemporary exciting and interesting for me. And I did enjoy this book. I gave it solid 4 stars. It's a very, very solid book, and even though, like I said, I do understand how this can be viewed as not a healthy book, I'm still surprised about how low the rating is on Goodreads. So I would suggest, if you are into YA fantasy plus magical realism plus, weird stuff happening, check this one out. This is it, guys. This is all of my wrap up for a week and a half. I think I did a pretty good job with trying to read as many library books as possible. Please let me know down below if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in this video, especially Wink Poppy Midnight, because I'm really into this book right now, so I want to discuss it with someone. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon. Bye! And I give this volume 3 stars. Fuck. And I think my library has only volumes number 1. Oh, fuck. What's going on with my face? Oh, man.